moving onwards, we are not going to have enough time in this next response to deal with both Florence and De Defectibus, but I will get to De Defectibus later. And I find it very, very common amongst sedevacantists a tendency of being irresponsible in the handling of church documents, biblical texts, and patristic texts. An argument advanced by Ken Bird is the argument the Council of Florence solemnly defined. I think he even argued that it infallibly defined the form of consecration to be used in the Mass. So what is the problem with this? Well, Florence never defined any such form. If one were to scour theology manual after theology manual, one would never find such a reference. Such an argument originates in the radical theology of Patrick Henry Almer. The reason such an argument is put forth is quite simple. Florence explains that a form that is prevalent in the Roman Rite of the Church, which comes in an addendum to the Jacobites and the decree to the Armenians, the Church says that this is a form to be used. It never solemnly defines this as a whole form to be used. In this form that comes from Florence, we find the form any portion in the consecration the sedevacantists insist must be used in order to bring about a valid consecration. The problem with such an argument? Well, 3 of the 5 Eucharistic institution accounts from the Scriptures, 1 Corinthians 11, Luke 22, John 6, don't have the form any formula. Furthermore, 2 of those passages have been formally defined by Trent as passages that evince a true Eucharistic truth and showing the reality of holy orders in Luke 22. If passages that are defined by Trent as Eucharistic and sacrificial in their form don't contain the wording that is insisted upon by the radicals, then we must dismiss this as a weak argument. Nevertheless, we must deal with this in order to dispel this argument. Sedevacantist Patrick Henry Almer originated this by saying that this was a solemn decree of the Ecumenical Council of Florence. Furthermore, in my debate against Peter Diamond entitled Is a New Mass Valid?, he specifically says that Florence says you must have this form. But if we read this form, we find nothing being declared. Nothing. What we find is that the Roman Rite uses this form of consecration. We don't find this as being the form necessary in order to bring about a valid sacrament. All of this comes crumbling down for the sedevacantists when we realize that in regards to the decree to the Armenians, a decree which left out the form, in fact, but it was mentioned shortly after since it wasn't put directly in the Armenian decree, we read the Catholic Encyclopedia telling us, while it is not necessary to hold this decree to be a dogmatic definition of the matter and form and minister of the sacraments, it is undoubtedly a practical instruction emanating from the Holy See, and as such has full authenticity in a canonical sense. That is, it is authoritative. Of course, the Catholic Encyclopedia was referencing another portion, not this in general. But moving forward, we see, once we examine this, that Florence wasn't attempting to solemnly define anything. This wasn't a dogmatic binding precept released by the Council. It is also interesting that this addendum to the decree to the Jacobites, we find a hearkening back to the decree for the Armenians, and we find that this form, now here's the interesting part, was never imposed as universal. Surely a solemn form, an infallible decree that must be used, would be imposed as universal, as dogmatic decrees are. But this is not the case when dealing with this. If we read the liturgy of the Armenians, we find a very different form than that emanating from Florence. In fact, I've spoken to Armenian theologian after theologian after theologian. You want to talk about the Orthodox Armenian branch? They've never used this form. You want to talk about those that came into communion with Rome? They never used this form. Yet we're told that this is a binding, infallible decree. I find arguments like this to be very weak, and it is precisely the reason why I get upset when I hear arguments that are levied by sedevacantists when research really isn't even done or the documents aren't even really read. Since I have a little bit of time, I don't have enough time to go into De Defectibus. I have about 2 more minutes left to speak. I will touch upon something that Ken Burt said in his opening statement I wasn't able to get to. He says that the Novus Ordo Missae, that it speaks less of a sacrifice and speaks more of a meal and a memorial. Well, this is our main issue here. The misunderstanding of the fact that a memorial is an emphasis of a sacrifice, and the highest you can get, because the term memorial comes from the Greek word anamnesis, which is specifically sacrificial language that comes right out of Luke 22. So is the Mass a mere memorial? Sure. If you want to say that it's a sacrifice, as a term memorial from the Greek anamnesis is, then we agree wholeheartedly. But we must understand what is being said. part of the reason why such argumentation is put forth, and part of the reason why sometimes, and I'm not just faulting the Sedevacantists, why sometimes both sides miss what each person is saying about the position, is when we don't understand the church's terminology. The church has always used the term memorial in reference to an anamnesis. It comes right from Luke 22. In fact, I spoke to Ken about this one time. I don't know if he even recalls, but the term memorial, excuse me, which comes up from Luke 22:19, from do this in memorial, or do this in remembrance of me, is in a direct reference to sacrifice. It has direct sacrificial overtones. So to say that the Mass is a mere memorial, you're kind of missing the point there. You're kind of misunderstanding what the church is saying. Going back, I'm not sure if Ken is still trying to deal with the Catechism of the Council of Trent, but I would recommend in a break or something if you want, so you can go ahead and check out what Duddy's literal rendering from the Latin is saying. And in fact, a number of notes by theologians have been made that show that the McEwen-Callan translation differs a good amount from that of the original Latin. But we can go in that later. My time is up for now.
Okay.
All right. Okay, there we go. Okay, you can go ahead and go.
All right. I will start.
Okay, after you go, I'm going to need to take a restroom break. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay, I'm going to put my mic on mute now.
Okay. The reason I say memorial or a meal or a memorial is not because I am saying it's not the anamnesis or whatever Greek word you just used there. It is meaning the Protestant interpretation of what they would call the Mass, the memorial of the Lord. Like when Luther said, don't call it a sacrifice. Call it a memorial of the Lord. Call it the Lord's Supper, but do not don't call it a sacrifice. When I say that, when a Sedevacantist makes that point, he is making that point because he is trying to say that the Novus Ordo in the ICEL, the concilium here, was trying to remove Catholic principles of propitiation out of the liturgy and to instill Protestant principles and doctrine into the new Mass. That's why there was 6 Protestant liturgists there. That's why they were actively participating with the concilium's concoction of the Novus Ordo Missae and working with I'm not sure, but you might want to correct me here, William, if I'm wrong, working with the ICL to make this a more Protestantized version of the Mass. And I have quotes here, and we'll get to them here in a little bit. That's the point I'm trying to make. Back to the words of consecration, and this is, going to be the crux of this whole debate here. If Duddy's interpretation of the Catechism of the Council of Trent is that this is my blood suffices, and if you say that that's the Catholic Church's teaching, and I asked you last time, please tell me where the Catholic Church teaches that this is my blood is all that is necessary for a valid consecration, I would like to see that. I haven't got that yet. Every theologian that I have looked at, and I have looked at quite a few, all say that the long form is absolutely necessary since the Council of Trent. And I am talking very, very, very many. And Halligan, he says same thing, that the long form is necessary. Davis says that the long form is necessary. Ligori says that the long form is necessary. Maurice de la Taille says that the long form is necessary. Wangler says that it's necessary. And I could just sit here and quote more. Benedict XIV says it's necessary. I know we have the issue with, I think it was St. Bonaventure. I can't remember what saint it was. Oh, where was it? Anyway, Capello says that it's necessary, the long form. So there's several theologians, sacramental theologians, who could have definitely sided with Duddy on what the Catechism of the Council of Trent says, and you say that the version that I have is wrong of the Council or of the Catechism of the Council of Trent. Bishop Pavaronis has an English translation of the Catechism, which is by a Reverend J. Donovan, professor of Maynooth College, And he says the same